Let's kick things off with one of the most crucial aspects of any presidency, the economy. Who handled it better, Trump or Biden? Let's break it down.
A strong economy means job creation, controlled inflation, and effective tax policies. Both presidents faced different challenges, but the numbers tell an interesting story.
Let's talk GDP growth. Under Trump, before the pandemic, the economy saw a steady 2.5% average annual growth. Tax cuts and deregulation fueled business expansion. But then COVID-19 hit, and in 2020, GDP crashed by negative 3.4%.
That's true. However, under Biden, the economy rebounded quickly, with GDP growth hitting 5.9% in 2021. That's the fastest rate since 1984. But before celebrating, let's factor in high inflation and government spending.
Good point. While Biden oversaw a fast recovery, inflation surged, peaking at 9.1% in 2022, the highest in 40 years. Many economists argue this was fueled by massive stimulus spending and supply chain disruptions.
But under Trump, the national debt also skyrocketed by $7.8 trillion, mainly due to tax cuts and pandemic relief. So was it really fiscal responsibility or just short-term economic gains?
Under Trump, before the pandemic, the U.S. hit a 50-year low unemployment rate of 3.5%. His administration added 6.6 million jobs in 3 years.
But then, COVID-19 wiped out 22 million jobs. Under Biden, 13 million jobs were added back within 2 years. The unemployment rate dropped back to 3.5%, matching Trump's pre-pandemic record.
True, but here's the catch. Many of those jobs were recoveries, not new job creations. When adjusting for pandemic losses, Trump's pre-pandemic economy was arguably stronger in job creation.
But Biden's policies also focused on wage growth. Median household income increased and job openings remained high. The question is, do you prefer fast job growth with inflation or stable growth with controlled prices?
Trump slashed corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%, encouraging business growth. His tax cuts also reduced individual income taxes, especially for high earners. The logic? More money for businesses means more hiring.
But Biden partially reversed those tax cuts for corporations, raising the minimum tax to 15% for big companies. His argument? Make corporations pay their fair share to fund infrastructure and social programs.
However, critics argue that higher corporate taxes discourage investments, slow down hiring, and push companies overseas. So, is it better to boost businesses or focus on public funding?
And let's not forget the Inflation Reduction Act under Biden, which aimed to cut deficits by taxing wealthy individuals and corporations. But did it really reduce inflation, or was it just a spending bill in disguise?
Foreign policy and global influence. A president isn't just a leader at home, but also on the world stage. The question is, who commanded more global respect, Joe Biden or Donald Trump?
That's right. Foreign policy includes alliances, trade, military actions, and diplomatic relations. Let's break it down and see which administration made a bigger impact.
Let's start with alliances. Biden re-strengthened U.S. ties with NATO and traditional allies. He reversed Trump's America First approach and rebuilt partnerships, particularly in Europe and Asia.
But Trump argued that NATO allies weren't paying their fair share. He pressured them to increase defense spending, and by 2020, European allies had invested more in their militaries than ever before.
Biden took a more traditional diplomatic approach, emphasizing multilateralism and cooperation. He also reinforced ties with allies through AUKUS, Australia-UK-US Pact, countering China's influence in the Indo-Pacific.
But was Trump's unpredictability a weakness or a strength? He was the first sitting U.S. president to meet with North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un. No real deal came out of it, but it was a historic shift in diplomacy.
Still, Biden's handling of Russia-Ukraine is a defining moment. He led a global effort to sanction Russia and send military aid to Ukraine. His leadership solidified Western unity against Putin's aggression.
But critics argue that Biden's policies escalated global tensions. Trump, on the other hand, boasted that Russia didn't invade Ukraine during his term, suggesting his tough guy diplomacy kept adversaries in check.
Trump's America First strategy reshaped global trade. He renegotiated NAFTA into the USMCA, United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which many experts agree was a better deal for American workers.
But Trump also launched a trade war with China, imposing tariffs on $370 billion worth of Chinese goods. While this was meant to protect American industries, studies show it also raised costs for U.S. consumers.
Biden kept many of those tariffs, but took a more diplomatic approach, working with allies to counter China rather than using aggressive unilateral moves. He also pushed for more domestic manufacturing through the CHIPS Act to reduce dependence on China.
But did Biden's approach slow down progress? Trump's hardline stance forced China into the Phase 1 trade deal, where they agreed to buy $200 billion in U.S. goods, though they didn't fully meet that target.
Now, let's talk military. Trump did not start any new wars, making him one of the few U.S. presidents in recent history to do so. Instead, he pushed for troop withdrawals, including in Afghanistan, Syria, and Iraq.
But Biden actually ended the war in Afghanistan, a conflict that lasted 20 years. However, the withdrawal was chaotic, with the Taliban regaining control in days and a deadly suicide attack killing 13 U.S. troops.
Many argue that Trump's deal with the Taliban, signed in 2020, set the stage for that withdrawal, but Biden's execution of it was widely criticized for being rushed and mismanaged.
On counterterrorism, Trump ordered the strike that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani, claiming it made the world safer. But some say it increased tensions with Iran.
Biden, on the other hand, took a more covert approach, ordering drone strikes on terrorist leaders while avoiding direct confrontations with Iran or North Korea.
From COVID-19 to healthcare reforms, both Trump and Biden made crucial decisions that impacted millions of Americans. The question is, who handled it better?
We've talked about the economy and foreign policy, but now we dive into one of the biggest challenges of modern presidencies: healthcare and pandemic response.
True, but Trump also downplayed the virus early on, calling it just like the flu and delaying lockdown measures. The U.S. led the world in COVID-19 deaths by mid-2020, raising questions about his leadership in a crisis.
COVID-19 hit the U.S. during Trump's presidency in early 2020. His administration launched Operation Warp Speed, investing billions in vaccine development. As a result, vaccines were developed in record time.
That approach came at a cost. By the time Trump left office in January 2021, over 400,000 Americans had died from COVID-19. His messaging on masks and social distancing was inconsistent, leading to confusion.
But wasn't Trump's strategy focused on balancing the economy and public health? He opposed long-term lockdowns to prevent economic collapse, arguing that the cure shouldn't be worse than the disease.
Yes, but Biden also faced new challenges, like vaccine hesitancy and emerging variants. He introduced federal vaccine mandates for businesses, which sparked major legal battles and backlash.
But Biden inherited the pandemic and a partially vaccinated population. His administration accelerated vaccine distribution, and by mid-2021, over 200 million doses had been administered.
Fair point. But Biden also passed the American Rescue Plan, providing $1.9 trillion for COVID relief, expanding testing, vaccines, and direct financial aid to Americans.
And let's not forget Biden's promise to shut down the virus. By the end of 2022, the U.S. still faced millions of new cases. Did he really deliver on that promise, or was it an unrealistic goal?
But without the mandate, millions of Americans dropped out of insurance coverage, and healthcare costs continued rising. Meanwhile, Biden expanded Obamacare, increasing subsidies to make coverage more affordable.
Outside of COVID, let's talk healthcare policies. Trump attempted to repeal the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, but failed to fully do so. However, he did remove the individual mandate penalty, meaning Americans were no longer fined for being uninsured.
However, under Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, Medicare gained the power to negotiate drug prices, lowering costs for seniors. That's a major win for affordability.
But did that expansion actually reduce healthcare costs? Some argue Biden's subsidies just increased government spending without addressing the root problem of high medical costs.
But Biden took a long-term approach. His administration pushed funding into future pandemic preparedness, improving vaccine research and stockpiling medical supplies.
Trump established Operation Warp Speed, which created the COVID-19 vaccines in less than a year, an unprecedented scientific achievement. Without it, vaccine rollouts under Biden wouldn't have been possible.
It depends on perspective. Trump led a historic vaccine effort, but his messaging was inconsistent. Biden improved rollout and long term policy, but faced new challenges like variance and hesitancy.
That's true. But here's the question: is it better to react quickly with immediate action like Trump, or focus on long term systemic changes like Biden?
From Paris Agreement withdrawals to green energy investments, their policies couldn't be more different. One prioritized economic growth and energy independence, the other focused on global climate leadership. So, who made the right call?
Climate change, one of the most controversial and defining issues of our time. The question today: who had the better approach, Donald Trump or Joe Biden?
But Biden immediately rejoined the agreement on his first day in office, reaffirming the U.S. as a leader in the global fight against climate change. He argued that the U.S. needed to take responsibility and work with other nations to reduce emissions.
Let's start with the Paris Climate Agreement. In 2017, Trump pulled the U.S. out, calling it a job killer and arguing that it hurt American businesses while letting countries like China off the hook.
Not exactly. Biden set a goal to cut U.S. emissions by 50% by 2030 and passed climate focused legislation to make that happen. Symbolic or not, it sends a message to the world that the U.S. is serious.
But here's the issue: did rejoining actually change anything? The Paris Agreement relies on voluntary pledges, and some of the biggest polluters, like China and India, aren't meeting their targets. So was it just symbolic?
But that came at a cost. Trump rolled back over 100 environmental regulations, allowing industries to pollute more. Clean energy investments dropped, and the coal industry, despite his promises, still declined.
Now, let's talk energy policy. Trump expanded fossil fuel production, pushing for energy independence. Under his presidency, the U.S. became the world's largest oil and gas producer.
Fair point. But Biden pushed for massive investments in renewable energy. His Inflation Reduction Act included $369 billion for clean energy, the biggest climate investment in U.S. history.
But let's be honest, fossil fuels still power most of the world. Under Trump, gas prices were lower, and the U.S. wasn't dependent on foreign oil. Isn't energy security just as important as climate policy?
That's why Biden's plan isn't just about renewables. It includes nuclear energy, battery storage, and electric vehicles. His goal isn't to eliminate fossil fuels overnight, but transition gradually.
But did it work? Under Biden, gas prices spiked, and he had to beg OPEC for more oil. Meanwhile, wind and solar still struggle with reliability. Can the U.S. really function on renewables alone?
But those cuts meant more pollution, more carbon emissions, and weaker climate protections. The EPA under Trump weakened clean water and air rules, putting short-term profits over long-term sustainability.
Trump's philosophy was clear: cut regulations, boost business. He argued that overregulation kills jobs and makes American companies less competitive.
And Biden's answer to that? New clean energy jobs. His administration promised to train workers for solar, wind, and EV industries, ensuring a transition, not just job losses.
But Biden's stricter policies have led to layoffs in the fossil fuel sector. Thousands of oil and gas workers lost their jobs because of pipeline shutdowns and stricter drilling regulations.
What do you think? Is climate change urgent enough to justify Biden's policies, or was Trump right to prioritize the economy? Comment below and let us know.
Trump focused on energy independence, job creation, and deregulation. Biden prioritized climate leadership, green energy, and emission reductions. The question is, which approach was better for America?
From border walls to court decisions, protests to policy shifts, these two presidents could not be more different. Let's break it down, issue by issue.
Social policies. They define a nation's values and its future. And when it comes to the U.S., few topics are as divisive as immigration, racial justice, and Supreme Court appointments. So who had the better approach, Donald Trump or Joe Biden?
But critics called it inhumane and ineffective. Family separations at the border under Trump sparked global outrage. The wall? Only a fraction was built, and illegal crossings still happened through other means.
Let's start with immigration, one of Trump's signature issues. His administration took a hardline stance, introducing the Remain in Mexico policy, expanding deportations, and, of course, building the border wall.
True. Biden reversed Trump's Remain in Mexico policy and stopped construction of the border wall. But he also introduced new pathways for legal immigration and invested in border technology rather than just physical barriers.
But let's look at the numbers. Illegal border crossings dropped under Trump compared to what happened under Biden. When Biden took office and rolled back many of Trump's policies, the U.S. saw record high illegal crossings.
Now, let's talk racial justice. The U.S. saw major protests in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. Trump's response? Calling for law and order and deploying federal agents against protesters.
Still, even some Democrats have admitted that Biden's policies created a border crisis. The question is, do you prioritize security and enforcement, or do you focus on humanitarian efforts and legal pathways?
Fair point. But Trump also downplayed systemic racism, often blaming the media or radical leftists for protests. Meanwhile, Biden put racial justice at the center of his campaign, promising reforms in policing, voting rights, and economic opportunities.
But let's not forget, Trump signed criminal justice reform with the First Step Act, reducing sentences for nonviolent offenders, something even Democrats praised. A Republican president doing prison reform? That's rare.
Biden did push for more diversity in government, making history by appointing the first black woman to the Supreme Court, Ketanji Brown Jackson. And he restored fair housing and anti-discrimination protections that Trump rolled back.
Yet under Biden, has anything really changed? Police reform stalled in Congress, voting rights laws failed to pass, and racial wealth gaps remain. His administration talks about it, but where's the action?
And that led to the overturning of Roe v. Wade, ending federal protections for abortion. A historic decision, but also one of the most controversial rulings in modern history.
If there's one area where Trump had a lasting impact, it's the Supreme Court. He appointed 3 conservative justices, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, shifting the court right for decades.
But Biden has appointed more diverse federal judges than any other president in recent history. Representation matters, and he's shaping the lower courts in ways that will have long-term effects.
But let's be clear. Trump followed the rules. He filled vacancies as any president would. Biden, on the other hand, has only appointed 1 Supreme Court justice so far and has faced pressure to expand the court, which could be seen as a power grab.
Now, it's up to you. Do you believe in strict enforcement and conservative values? Or do you side with progressive reforms and diversity efforts? Drop your thoughts in the comments.
Trump prioritized border security, conservative judicial appointments, and law enforcement. Biden focused on racial justice, diversity, and legal immigration pathways. The question is, which vision is better for America?
From economic policies to social movements, Supreme Court rulings to global conflicts, their decisions will shape the U.S. for decades. Let's break it down.
The final question, how will history remember Donald Trump and Joe Biden? Every president leaves a legacy, but which one will stand the test of time?
His biggest impact? The Supreme Court. With 3 conservative justices appointed, Trump reshaped the judicial system for a generation, leading to the overturning of Roe v. Wade and major rulings on gun rights and religious freedom.
Donald Trump, one of the most polarizing figures in modern history. Supporters call him a political outsider who put America first. Critics say he was reckless and divisive. So what will history say?
His legacy will likely depend on how history views those events. Was he a champion of the working class, or did he weaken democracy by questioning election results and fueling division?
He also revived the U.S. economy pre-COVID, cut taxes, and prioritized energy independence. But let's not ignore the controversies. 2 impeachments, January 6th, and ongoing legal battles.
His biggest impact? Historic climate investments, NATO leadership during the Ukraine war, and COVID-19 recovery efforts. He also appointed the most diverse cabinet in history.
Now Joe Biden, elected on a promise to restore normalcy and unity. But has he succeeded?
That's the question. Will history remember Biden as a stabilizing force after Trump, or as a weak leader who struggled to unite the country?
But let's talk about the challenges. Record high inflation, a chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal, and an ongoing border crisis. Will these overshadow his achievements?
Will future generations see Trump as a revolutionary or a threat to democracy? Will Biden be remembered as a great leader or just a transitional figure? The final decision isn't ours, it's yours.